Now I'll start with the ideal. Stress management is something which is negative. No, it means somehow managing stress, making it more bearable, more tolerable, less painful. Why not talk about something positive? The positive thing is why should there be stress at all? Total eradication of stress and replacing it with love, peace, and joy. That is what we saw in the first session, that if we live our life based on love, it would bring in our life peace and joy and fulfillment, and there'll be no room for stress. That would be the ideal. But then the usual response is that that is easy to say, it's difficult to practice. But then if we think about it, is the life that most people live easy? That life is stressful and also difficult. So life is not easy either way, and perhaps the stressful life that most people live is even more difficult than the life that is full of love, peace, and joy. It's only the fear of the unfamiliar, the fear of the unknown that sometimes discourages a person, and he's not able to make a shift to a new way of living, which would lead to eradication of stress. Before I go further, let me get meditation a little out of the way, because whenever there's a session on stress management, most people assume that there will be a lot of time devoted to just the technique of meditation. The technique of meditation by itself will not really achieve anything, because just sitting quietly, no matter how well, no matter how good the technique is, for 20 minutes cannot compensate for the tension and turmoil of 24 hours. That is expecting really too much from too little. What helps is a change in the attitude to life, the change in our attitude to events and circumstances in our life, looking upon them as a blessing rather than as trouble. And meditation, at the most, can facilitate the process of introspection so that we are able to go within and see to what extent we are able to put into practice the knowledge that we have. We are also able to go within and establish a connection with our deepest self, establish a connection with a higher power, and get from that a sense of security, a sense of protection. So meditation can help in all those ways, but all the same to depend entirely on a proper technique of meditation, because usually, if people don't get relief from meditation, they feel that probably I don't know how to meditate. If only somebody could tell me the right technique, then I'll be able to meditate properly, and then all the stress will go. So the fault is not with the technique. The fault is because we want in our life only minor adjustments. We want that we should sit quietly for 20 minutes in meditation and leave the rest of our life completely unaltered as it is. Now, yes, we can live our life unaltered in the sense that we can keep doing our usual work, but the way we look at our work and the rest of our life, that way has to change, the view has to change. And that is what helps us come out of stress. And this will become a little more clear as we go along, how that view should change and why it should change. Here in this picture, you see an American psychologist, Richard Carlson, and the cover of one of his books, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and It's All Small Stuff. In a way, the cover of the book itself is a formula for stress management. What it means in more familiar language is that don't worry about small things. Everything is a small thing. Now that itself is a formula, which means that we very often have a tendency to magnify certain things. We magnify a minor inconvenience and start feeling as if it's a major problem. And at a certain level of perception, from a certain angle, from a certain plane of perception, everything is a small thing. So if everything is a small thing, why do we have to worry about it? So that itself becomes a formula for stress management. But There's one more important thing that Richard Carlson has said in this book and as well as elsewhere, and that gives us a very fundamental way of looking at all stressful situations. What he says is that all stress results from the gap between the way things are and the way we would like them to be. Looks a very simple thing, but it's a very general statement which applies perhaps to every stressful situation. The gap between the way things are and the way we would like them to be. I have this much money, I want this much money, there's a gap between the two, and therefore I am under stress. I want to be healthy, but I am sick. There's a gap between what I want and what actually exists, and therefore I am under stress. I want my husband or wife to behave in a certain way, but he or she insists on behaving in just the opposite way. So again, there's a big gap between what I want and what actually exists, and therefore I'm under stress. So all stress essentially results from the gap between the way things are and the way I would like them to be. Now, theoretically, this gap can be bridged in at least two contrasting ways. One is that the things should change so that they become the way I want them. That looks like the simplest solution, the solution that I would really like, which means that the situation should become as I like it, and then the stress is gone, the gap is closed. But then in real life, it's not always easy to change the situation, and therefore we also think of the other way of closing the gap, and that is things may not change, but I can change, so that I look at things differently. And now I do not want I wanted earlier, because now I'm able to look at the situation differently. And then the stress is gone. For example, I do not like the lockdown. I do not want to be at home all the time. That is the source of my stress. But then I can change myself and think that being at home means that I get so much more time with the family. I don't have to commute. The pollution levels have come down. I don't get stuck in traffic jams. So I found many reasons to feel better and to feel that the situation is not really bad. In fact, I have found so many positive things in the situation that I start liking it. So if I like the situation as it is, then this gap is closed. So nothing has really changed. The lockdown is still there. I'm still at home. But now the stress is gone because now I've found many reasons why I can like the situation as it is. So these are the two ways: either the situation should change or I should change. Either the lockdown should go or I should change so that I start liking the lockdown. This is what has been brought out in the next picture. The square at the center shows what stress is due to. What exists is very different from what I want. And three ways have been shown of bridging this gap. The two are, one and two are the two extremes. That is, the situation changes so that what I want actually becomes the reality. Situation two is I change so that what exists is quite okay for me. What exists also becomes what I want. And situation three is using these two approaches together, because they're not mutually exclusive. To some extent, the situation can change. To some extent, I can change. For example, I have this much money, I want this much money. I work harder, I earn a little more money. But at the same time, I reduce my desires. So I worked at both ends. As a result of working at both ends, now the money that I have is enough to meet my desires, and the gap is closed. So I worked at both ends. A little more money, not as much as I wanted, but at the same time, the money that I now have is enough to meet my desires, which I worked out. Now they are not as many as they were. I've eliminated the unnecessary ones. So these are the three ways in which this gap can be closed, and in a way, this is a very generalizable solution to all types of stress. Now, this type of change that I bring about in myself so that I start liking things as they are depend upon seeing something positive in the situation, and therefore we call it positive thinking. So I can change essentially by seeing things differently. As has been said, जब नजर बदल जाती है तो नजरिया बदल जाता है, जब नजरिया बदल जाता है तो नजारे बदल जाते हैं. So that is how, by changing myself, I can in fact not only take the stress away, I may become happy in the new situation. Now if the basic or the most useful way of overcoming stress remains that I should change myself, then it means that the cause may seem outside, that is, the cause is lockdown, for example, but the solution is within me. I have to see how I can see something positive in the situation. So the solution is within me, and which what means is that I have to work on myself to become a different type of person whose likes and dislikes have changed, who now likes what actually exists. Now let's take this a little further. And why we need to go further is because there are some situations in which no matter how hard one tries, it is impossible to see anything positive. For example, somebody has lost a job or somebody has lost a near and dear one. Now, how can you say that that person should also see something positive in the situation? So there are some situations in which it is logically almost impossible to see anything positive, and that is where the spiritual approach helps us, because that may help us see something positive. So the approach remains the same. We are trying to see something positive. Uh, if logic fails, then we turn to something which is higher than logic, and that is the spiritual worldview. That doesn't mean that the spiritual worldview excludes logic, because the intellect is also a manifestation of the divine. That has also been given to us by God. The capacity to think and reason is also a gift that we have received from the same Creator, who has given us the capacity to think at a level higher than, or perceive things, look at things from a plane higher than reason. But all the same, if reason fails, then we have to tap that capacity which enables us to go higher than reason, and for that the spiritual worldview helps us, because it's only the spiritual worldview that recognizes that reality which exists at a level higher than reason. So let's see how that can help us. If the problem is with people, say with a friend, with a colleague, with the husband, with the spouse, so if the problem with is a person, interpersonal relationships are one of the most common sources of stress, then I start seeing the divine in the other person. If I see the divine in the other person, I'll realize that the other person may be only an imperfect manifestation of the divine, but then so am I. The only thing is the other person is differently imperfect. Now, if I look at the person in this way, that we are all manifestations of the divine, and in that sense, we are all one, and it's only that the other person whom I do not like is differently imperfect, then I'll start seeing that person's flaws in a more charitable light. Another type source of stress are not people, but events, something that has happened. And then if I think about it from the spiritual angle, it is the unseen hand of the divine which is there behind all events. And if it is the divine will, which is all powerful, which is behind the event, I have to accept it. Now, this acceptance or surrender has three levels. The first level is that I accept it because the divine is all powerful, and therefore I have to accept it, which makes the divine or God look like a dictator. I have no other choice. But then there is a higher level of this acceptance, and that is that the divine is not only all powerful, it's also all wise. And if in its wisdom it has decided to do something, there must be something good in it. If I can't see anything good in it, it is because of my limitations. My capacity to understand is limited, and my knowledge of the future is nil. So maybe with time, as things unfold, as the future unfolds, I'll be able to see what was positive in what has happened. So this is the second level of surrender, higher level, which makes it easier to accept things, because I see in what has happened not only the divine will, I see in it also the divine wisdom. There's yet a third level, a still higher level. I accept it because it is the divine will. I accept it because it also has the divine wisdom behind it. I may not know everything that is good about it because my capacity is limited, but I also know at least one thing which is good about what has happened. And what is it that I know? That this is an opportunity for spiritual growth. Spiritual growth is the purpose of life. So this is an opportunity for fulfilling the purpose of life. So now this is also a reason, but this is a type of reason which has come from a level higher than the usual reason. Usually what we call reasoning. So it is from that higher level that I feel that I have discovered a spiritual reason for looking at the situation differently, that this is as this situation has been given to me, whether that situation is an event or that situation is an inconvenient person in my life in whom I have started seeing the divine. So this inconvenient person has been given to me, or this event has happened in my life because the divine has given me through this an opportunity for fulfilling the purpose of life. So if I'm able to see all events and circumstances as opportunities for spiritual growth, I get a very uh, generalizable and infallible prescription for looking at all stressful situations, for getting rid of all types of stress. And it is not just a way of thinking to make me feel good. It's not a sort of a feel good way of thinking. It is something which is based on the deepest truths of existence, which we went into briefly in the first session. So, to summarize, changing oneself rather than trying to change the situation is the key to stress management, because changing the situation is generally not within our hands. We can't wish the coronavirus pandemic away. Uh, so, changing oneself is the key to stress management. And changing oneself means seeing something positive in the situation. And even when there is nothing positive in a situation, there's always one thing positive in it. And what is that one thing? That one thing is it is an opportunity for spiritual growth. So every situation is an opportunity for spiritual growth, is a potent, infallible prescription for lasting mental peace in all types of situations which can give us stress. So this is how we can get rid of stress. And of course, along with that, if through our attitude to work and through the type of choices that we make which are based on love, we can eradicate stress and replace it with love, peace, and joy. So the type of positive thinking that we get from the spiritual approach is unlimited. If you use only reasoning, this positive thinking has limits. There must be some situations in which there'll be nothing positive. There's no positive, nothing positive that we can see. But this spiritual approach gives us an unlimited way of thinking positively. Here, so positive thinking becomes unlimited. Now, turning a little to COVID stress and see and try to see how we can apply some of these principles. And of course, after that, I'll go on to what we call first aid in stress. That is some of the things which may not be able to eradicate stress, or which may not be a permanent value, but they help us. Like, first aid is like a bandaging or something, and that does help us overcome the immediate pain, takes care of the immediate problem, and allows time for true healing to take place. So in stress also, that first aid is required quite often, so that we'll come to a little later. But let's see how we can apply these principles in COVID stress. If one were to generalize the stress that has resulted from the coronavirus pandemic, it falls under two categories: uncertainty and helplessness. Uncertainty: I might die, I might lose my job, I don't know when the exams will be, uh, I don't know how long this pandemic will go on. Now, these are things which are reflecting a sense of uncertainty, and this uncertainty leads to anxiety and worry. The second is a sense of helplessness. I am in a situation in which I can do nothing about it. I can't wish the pandemic away. I have lost my job. The exams have been postponed. All this has actually happened, and I'm helpless. I can't do anything to change this situation. I've lost a loved one. Not helplessness. So, in other words, the stress is due to things which might happen and things which have actually happened. What might happen creates a sense of uncertainty and leads to worry and anxiety. And what has actually happened is a reality which I have to grapple with. So both types of stress we have seen during the coronavirus pandemic. So let's first see what might happen. I might lose my job, I might die, my near and dear ones might die. Now all these possibilities are there, and they lead to worry, anxiety, and disguised stress. What disguised stress is, we'll come to a little later. But worry and anxiety, let's talk about that a little more. In fact, the word worry has become extremely common. It looks as if it has become a part of our common words, which we use after every few sentences. Especially, when you go to the media, look at the language loops in the media, they, for everything that they are talking about the pandemic, they say that this is what is worrying, that is what is worrying, and the worry is that this might happen, and so on. So worry has become a very common word, and worry and anxiety go together. And for that, there are some answers which are at a mental level or rational level, and then also level at a higher level. One of the answers, which is at the mental level for all worry and anxiety in general, including the worry and anxiety due to all the things which coronavirus pandemic has created, is that worrying won't help. Just worrying about something which has not yet happened will not help. It does not change the situation in any way. And in fact, this looks irrational, but that is also true. If I worry too much about something, if I think too much about something, it actually increases the possibility of it's happening. If I'm not worrying about it, probably it won't happen. If I start worrying about it, it increases the possibility of it's happening. It's completely irrational. But what we forget is that thoughts have a power of their own. Thoughts have a power to materialize. Thoughts are not powerless. They're not mere thoughts. They have a tendency to materialize. So if for nothing else, at least for that reason, we have to find a way of not worrying about things. And one of the rational arguments against worry is that worrying will not help in any way. So why do something which will not help? And here is a common saying. I have twisted it a bit to in my own way, because when I went to the net and looked for this, who said this type of a thing first, I found there are about half a dozen people to whom it has been attributed, which means there's small changes. Many people have said this. So I twisted it further to suit exactly what I wanted to say and in the type of language which I liked. Worrying is like paying interest on money that you may never borrow. So that is what worrying has been compared to. You're not even borrowed the money and you're worrying about how much interest I'll have to pay on it. So you start paying the interest before the money has been borrowed. You start worrying about it before the problem has actually happened. So worrying does not help. The other rational answer is at a statistical level. Only say 1% of the people in the country got affected by COVID. At least out of all those who got tested positive, only a very small percentage was symptomatic. Of all those who were symptomatic, only a very small percentage had severe symptoms. Of all those who had severe symptoms, very few died. So the statistical probability of any one person dying of coronavirus infection is extremely small. Now, this is a statistical assurance. But statistical assurances have their limits, because while that tells us that the possibility of this happening is very low, nobody can give a guarantee that it will not happen. So far as I as an individual is concerned, it's not a possibility, it's not less than 1%, either it is 0% or 100%. So statistical assurance has a psychological impact, but it is not a guarantee. So what is the guarantee? That I'm prepared for everything. I said, hope for the best and be prepared for the worst. So how can I be truly prepared for everything? To some extent, at a rational level, especially if I'm philosophically oriented, that is what philosophy is about. One can be prepared for everything as a philosopher. But then that also has limits. Anything which comes from the intellect has limits, and doubts will keep creeping in spite of having a philosophical temperament, or what is called in spite of having philosophical indifference, that nothing affects me. I'm immune to everything. Nothing shocks me, nothing affects me. So prepared for everything. We can be truly prepared for everything only if we trust that higher power. Only if we trust that higher power, that it knows best, and therefore whatever will happen will be for the best, because it has its wisdom behind it. Even things which appear unpleasant to me are in my own interest, because they are designed, they have been given to me as a gift for fulfilling the purpose of life. Sri Aurobindo said something to the effect that the only way we can walk through life, erratic and unpredictable life, which is full of all types of dangers and perils. This is the general character of life. The coronavirus pandemic has only highlighted it. The only way we can go through life is through a combination of two things. Looks very simple, only two things. But those two things are not easy. One is a total trust, a total faith, a total surrender. All these things go together: faith, trust, and surrender. Total, which means in every part of the being, without any doubts, not only at the mental level, that yes, now I've understood what faith is and what trust is and what surrender is. It's not a mental understanding which is important. Truly surrendered in all parts of the being, the way the soul would be, because the soul has no problems ever. So the soul is a divine essence. So it is one with the divine. So for it to surrender itself to itself is not a problem. So that is the only way to be in perfect surrender. So two things. One is that faith, trust, and surrender. And the second is divine grace. That is the infinite love of the divine, which is behind everything that happens. And the divine loves all. And through that infinite love, often gives us much more than we deserve. So it is that plus our total unshakable faith, these two things put together are the only combination that can help us go through life unaffected, in spite of the usual nature of life. It's being full of all types of peril and disaster. And then Sri Aurobindo says these two things go together, which means one leads to the other. The divine grace is always there, but we become open to that influence. We are fully receptive to that influence. That influence is able to act fully on us only when we have that total faith. So be prepared for everything is not something purely mental. It cannot result from a philosophy. It requires that higher approach. So for dealing with worry and anxiety about things which might happen, neither the idea that worrying won't help, nor the statistical assurance that it's very unlikely to happen can help, because none of these things can give a guarantee that it will not actually happen. But only when you are prepared that if it happens, even then I'm prepared. If it doesn't happen, even then I'm prepared. If it doesn't happen, I'll be full of gratitude. If it happens, I'll still be full of gratitude. So only that attitude can prepare us for everything, and that can come only from the spiritual level. These are beautiful lines which express the same thing from Sri Aurobindo's epic poem Savitri. If this is all, then all is surely well. If there is more, then all can still be well. Now, that was about worry and anxiety resulting from what might possibly happen. And when our mind starts working overtime, there's no limit to the negative things that we can think of and all the worst case scenarios which we can come up with. But then what is this disguised stress? We very often, sometimes have by temperament or in a situation, have a tendency to deny stress, deny this worry and anxiety. We are afraid of many things which might happen, but we want to keep a very calm surface and say, no, no, I'm not worried about anything. I'm not anxious about anything. I don't care for anything. But somewhere deep within, we are worried, we are anxious. So all that is there. Then what happens is this can show up through physical symptoms. So these physical symptoms like a headache or other aches and pains, gastrointestinal symptoms, diarrhea, constipation. Uh, these are some of the common ones, but others also, which sometimes we associate more with easily with worry and anxiety, like not being able to sleep properly. That's also physical symptoms, but there's an underlying mental distress, but not just disturbances in sleep, but even purely physical looking symptoms like a pain in the stomach or diarrhea, constipation, headache. In fact, the more bizarre the symptoms, the more likely it is that they are the result of disguised stress. We'll not go into the details, but this is something which we have to remember. And we can't even imagine the extent to which physical symptoms can appear as a result of stress, the extent to which stress can manifest through physical symptoms, not just mild ones, but extremely severe ones. Now we come to stress resulting from what has actually happened. It has become a reality. We are not just visualizing what might happen, it has actually happened. Now, what has actually happened can be divided into minor inconveniences and major issues. Some examples of minor inconveniences which have resulted from COVID are that I can't go out, I can't socialize, and since I am with the family all the time, uh, we are breathing on each other's neck all the time, and that is leading to a lot of friction. So both the types of things have happened depending upon the family. Some people have enjoyed spending more time with the family, being with the family all the time, and some have found that the reason they were surviving so far as a family and not feeling the friction was because the contact was short and sporadic. Being with each other all the time uh, has brought out that friction. But still, these are relatively minor inconveniences, and to magnify a minor inconvenience is not right. And what will help us is, to some extent, to see that we only have a minor inconvenience. The same pandemic has led to many major issues for many others. Not a very nice way to feel good about what others are going through, but all the same, this comparison does help us. And if we give it an expression by doing something for those to whom greater problems have come through the pandemic, then we'll forget our own problem. So helping somebody else is one of the best ways to, in fact, deal with these minor inconveniences. We'll come to that again when we talk about the first aid in stress, helping somebody. Now here is one of the things that did rounds on WhatsApp, and some of you might have already seen it, a positive way of looking at the lockdown. We are not stuck at home, we are safe at home. The world is closed for innovation, grand reopening soon. Now we come to major issues, which can't be just brushed aside like these minor inconveniences. And probably one of the most serious things that happened was loss of livelihood. And this is a picture which again did the rounds on WhatsApp as the picture of the year. Migrant workers rendered jobless and homeless, walking thousands of miles sometimes to go back to their village. Now, this talk is actually not meant for these people, because no matter what we talk about, stress management cannot be a consolation to these people. And in fact, if we are able to convey what we are talking to these people, it would be insulting them. However, one thing which I might say at this stage is that the fact that such things happened means that as a society we failed, because they had quite often near them people with much better means who could have looked after them instead of forcing them to take to this type of migration. Factory owners, landlords in whose houses they were living on rent, uh, contractors who had engaged them for construction work. These people are people who are expected to have enough savings to at least take care of the basic needs of these people who were busy uh, in their construction work or working in their factories, etc. They had enough savings to take care of these, and if they had taken care of these individually, things like this may not have happened, at least on the scale on which they did. And to say that it was the job of the government would be expecting too much from the government. No government in the world can reach immediately at short notice all such situations and take care of all these people. It is the more fortunate people around them who have to take care of them, not the government. But then people who had savings, who were in good jobs, many of them also lost their jobs, and many of them came up with good solutions. And for them, it was easy to look at the situation positively if they had that type of an approach. So losing the job is not as big a tragedy, at least for a certain category of people, as it looks. Necessity is the mother of invention. They discovered that instead of being dependent on a job, they can do something on their own and be their own bosses. One type of businesses suffered, but another type of businesses came up. So uh, they found ways of dealing with this. The more creative ones, uh, the more opportunistic ones, you might say, found a way of finding a solution to this. Instead of being in a job, they became freelancers. Maybe, I mean, it was not as comfortable, but then their savings plus whatever money which they started making very soon from other means by doing things different from what they had been doing helped them go through without much hardship. And some of them probably could even turn a corner, and now they may not want to go back to the same job. Again, this is something which you might have heard on the WhatsApp messages which did all these rounds, कि लाखों के कपड़े शोरूम्स में धरे रह गए, मास्क करोड़ों का व्यापार कर गया. So if you can't sell garments, start selling masks. Sort of that typifies the approach which one could take if one had lost the livelihood. Then bereavement, losing a near and dear one. Again, I mean, one cannot have a blanket sort of a treatment of this, because losing an elderly person in the family is a loss, but easier to go through without much change in life, unless, I mean, the person was in the ICU for a long time and it drove the family bankrupt. Otherwise, losing an elderly person in the family may not be much of a hardship, but losing the breadwinner in the family, or losing a woman who was taking care of the children in the family, or a child losing both one or both its parents. Now, those are the type of things which, again, cannot be brushed aside. There is no easy solution to them. But in situations where this loss is not in that category, where some sort of a help has to come from somewhere, if it is not in that category, then what one can say is that one has to understand the limitations of life and also the insignificance of death. The limitation of life is that anyone who is born has to die, and the insignificance of death is because death is not the end of life. Death is only a passage to the next life. It's like changing a dress. And this body is gone, we'll get another body. So, that approach. And also, I mean, one thing which I have found which helps many people who otherwise have no problem is just have too much attachment to the person who is gone. One thing which helps is to realize that you are not doing any favor to that person by going on and on crying for that person. It only shows that you are thinking about yourself. You are thinking about what that person meant to you, how the absence of that person has affected you. You are thinking about yourself. You're not thinking of that person. That person has been released from all the difficulties and problems of life. And wherever that person is, and we know that the soul is immortal, so their soul is there somewhere. Wherever that soul is probably able to see you, and by going on and on with this mourning, by going on crying for that person, you are actually disturbing that soul, because that soul also wants to see you happy. He doesn't want to see you attached in this way. That is disturbing the soul. So if you collect yourself and accept it as a part of the divine will, grow spiritually through even this episode, that will help you, and it will help that soul also to be at peace. So this is a bit about this apparently irreversible loss, which many people have suffered due to COVID, losing a near and dear one. This is the type of stress which many students are going through. IIT students might be different because they are already in a course which sooner or later they will finish and get their degrees. But those who are at the level of, say, class 10 or class 12, for them, repeated postponement of the exams or cancellation of the exams, uncertainty about when the exams will be, has created quite a bit of disturbance. And some of them are worried about their career. Some of them say that on one hand, the exam is not coming, so we have plenty of time to study, but we can't study because we don't feel like studying. So one positive way of looking at this is that this has brought them face to face with life as it is. Life is uncertain, erratic, and unpredictable, and this reality has been brought home to them through what is happening. So better to understand life, because we had taken in the last few decades with growth in science and technology, many of us had started taking life for granted, and we had started taking certainty for granted. We planned things, and most of the time, this has brought these young people in touch with the realities of life. But then, is there something more positive that can be done? Instead of saying that now I'm feeling very worried and anxious in this situation, don't even feel like studying, just say, great. Huh? Take time to reflect on life. Gives you a time to understand life better. Move from schooling to education. Schooling is not about things which you really want to learn. It's education that teaches you what you really want to learn. And it is during the coronavirus pandemic that all types of education became possible. Short courses, long courses, workshops, lectures, so much material became available, some of it free, some of them at a very low cost, that virtually anybody could get by putting in the type of topic that he's looking for, something of his own interest, and educate himself. And it didn't matter where the student was in the world and where the teacher was in the world. So no matter where in the world you are, you can get the best of teachers to teach you the subject that you want, free or at very low cost. That is true education, because you are really interested in it. So that is what you will enjoy. And when you enjoy it, it will rekindle your love for learning, which schooling might have killed. Because no schooling, caters to the individual to the extent that you can, if you choose your subject and your teacher, and you have the choice of even switching off. If you find that you are disappointed, you had great expectations from the teacher and it didn't come up to your expectations. Like, all of you, if I'm not coming up to your expectations, you can turn your video off and nobody knows what you're doing. So that sort of freedom which the pandemic gave the freedom to move from schooling to education, rediscover the love for learning. And when the exams are announced, then you start doing what you generally do for the exam. Study in a way that helps you to do well in the exam. every exam is a farce to some extent. But you have to beat the system by giving it what it wants. So you prepare what it wants and prepare for that. In other words, divide the time between now and the time when the exams are announced into two parts. From now till the exams are announced, enjoy true education and understand life. Once the exams are announced, then beat the system by giving it what it wants. If you divide it, then you have something to do throughout and your plan is clear. So you have a plan within this uncertainty. The first period till the exams are announced is uncertain. We don't know how long it will last. In fact, the longer it lasts, the more of your true education. So that would be the positive way of looking at it. A bit of humor here. This again has done rounds on the WhatsApp. You might have seen it. The new senior secondary certificate. This is to certify that such and such person has passed this exam without any effort in the first division during the second wave. He has obediently hidden his ignorance with a mask, kept proper social distance from his books, and has kept his study material under strict lockdown. Now we come to first aid in stress, which I talked about. In this, physical activity is important because any type of physical activity relaxes us. And since many of us have been homebound, one has to think of the physical activity that can be done at home. And in that category, yogic practices are the best. And even otherwise, even if we have the possibility of going out of the house, yogic practices do better than other physical activity. Today is not the time and the context to talk about it, and also the time is running out. So we'll not talk about why yogic practices are better than other types of physical activity in great detail, but especially from the point of relaxing, how yogic practices are better. Firstly, they by themselves don't consume much energy. Secondly, relaxation is inbuilt into the session. And third, some of the pranayamas are relaxing. To other extraneous factors like the atmosphere in which the classes are generally conducted, the soothing voice of the teacher, a prayer which one might recite at the beginning and the end of the session, background music which you might play while you are practicing these things, while you're doing the physical practices, the company which you might have, and the attitude to these practices. What is the attitude which helps us reduce stress? The attitude is that I'm doing this so that my body is fit, and I want my body to be fit, my body and mind actually to be fit, so that I can be an adequate instrument, a fit instrument for fulfilling the divine will. So with that attitude and all these things, yogic practices become very relaxing. Meditation is also one of the relaxation techniques, and I referred to it a bit earlier. It can be very effective as first aid, even if not properly done. But if properly done, which means that if you do it as an opportunity for introspection, as an opportunity for connecting to your deepest self, for connecting to a higher power, then meditation can be a great help. This is a concentrated period, but then it will help substantially only if one also changes the attitude to events and circumstances of life, which means treating everything that happens in life as an opportunity for spiritual growth. Then music by itself is good first aid. Stay moderately busy. Some people have been rendered very idle, and that has been a source of stress during the coronavirus pandemic. So find something to do. Any type of work is better than no work at all. And some people became over busy. Within families, sometimes there was an imbalance. The lady of the house was extremely busy and the husband had not much to do. So share the work so that both are working moderately. So stay moderately busy. Help somebody. When we help somebody, we forget our own problem and also we grow spiritually. Actually, that person is helping us by giving us an opportunity to grow. Again, this thing you might have seen, it did some rounds on the WhatsApp. It was in the form of a video that a person who had a showroom for ready-made garments, realized that very few customers were coming. He had 4 employees whom he was paying 12,000 rupees each. And he thought that although I'm not feeling good about it, I have to uh, lay off one of them. I have only 3. At the most, I can afford to have 3 people. Uh, he was paying them 12,000 rupees a month. So after great deliberation, using all types of reasoning, he decided who was the one whom he might dismiss. And when he told that person apologetically that I'm sorry, you'll have to leave, this young boy had tears in his eyes. And when the other 3 employees came to know what was happening, then one of the girls, who was one of the employees, uh, she said, "Sir, may I say something?" Uh, the owner of the showroom said, "Yes, sure." She said, uh, "You pay us 12,000 rupees a month, and you are willing to keep 3 of us, which means 36,000. Uh, if instead of 12,000 rupees a month, I get only 9,000, I will manage." And she looked at the other 2, and the other 2 also said, "Yes, we can also manage with 9,000. So you can have all 4 of us and just pay us 9,000 rupees a month." Now, this was a unique gesture. This girl heard her inner voice and gave an expression to it. It agreed with the inner voice of the uh, uh, other 2. And the owner was also relieved of the guilt that actually he was feeling in laying off one of the employees. So, different ways people have helped, and the best in man has also come out during the coronavirus pandemic, although the worst also comes out in such situations, but the best also came out in many different ways. Then, in the first aid, we also talk of expressive therapies, like expressing yourself through writing, music, art, dance. But one of the simplest expressive therapies is just writing a diary. Write down in your diary what you're feeling and what you're going through. This can be very helpful. Then a fire ritual. This is, if you have a problem with some person, forgive that person fully. If you find it difficult to forgive, write down everything that you want to say to that person and then consign that piece of paper to the fire. And say to yourself, now goes into the fire, I have no more grievances, I have forgiven this person completely. Then, having some company helps in all stressful situations. So perhaps those who were all alone were also under stress because of that reason, because they were all alone inside and could not go out to meet anybody. But then, of course, people have kept in touch through the telephones and video calls and WhatsApp and whatnot. But all the same, some contact with a real thing is better. And then, in that sense, having a pet or even looking after a plant can be helpful. And if everything fails, talk to somebody. And that helps the person feel lighter. Talk to somebody in whom you can confide, or to a professional counselor. And the ultimate counselor, of course, is the divine, who is available to each one of us day or any time of the day or night, without any appointment, completely free of charge. So talk to that counselor during your meditation or prayer. Prayer and meditation are overlapping. They are different, but they are overlapping, and essentially they both involve a contact with the traditional division is meditation, we listen to the divine. In prayer, we speak to the divine. But then there can be an overlap, a bit of uh, speaking also in meditation, and quite a bit of listening also in prayer. And last but not least, particularly in relation to COVID stress, stress is contagious. And we pick it up from people around us, we pick it up from the environment. And in this sense, media have been not very helpful, in the sense that they are doing their job, but then if we uh, watch too much of what is going on the media, that itself generates a lot of stress. So let them do their job, but then our job is not to expose ourselves too much to negative propaganda that is going on in the media. So one should realize that the stress can also be contagious, just peace can be contagious. So we come back to where we began more or less. Uncertainty due to things which might happen, we are imagining them, and helplessness because of what has happened. In a way, both have been helpful because uncertainty has once again made us aware of the true nature of life, the true nature of the phenomenal world, which is uncertain. And helplessness has also made us realize our limitations. In spite of all the progress that mankind has made, we are helpless in front of a tiny invisible virus. So, in a way, both the uncertainty and the helplessness do one thing. They make us turn to a higher power uh, for whom everything is easy. Things which appear to us difficult are also easy for that higher power. And that can be the beginning of a new way of living, a new turn that we give to our lives. So helplessness is actually help in disguise. It is help from the divine so that we turn to that divine. We are not doing the divine a favor. It is in our own interest to turn to that power. And the more we approach it, the more we find we can exceed ourselves. We can exceed our limitations. The more we become one with that, the more we become one with our deepest self, which is the same as that higher power, the more we find we can transcend our limitations. So actually, it is self-exceeding. It is not doing a favor to the divine, and it's not giving in by wiping out our identity, which is sometimes the way this process is looked at. So we are not wiping out our identity, we are enhancing ourselves. We are helping, we are going through a process which helps us self-exceed, overcome the limitations which normally plague a human being. I'm not sure whether I showed this last time, but this is a book which deals with many of the issues that we talked in the first session and today's session in greater detail. Dr. Mahim Sagar loves this book, and he has not only read it, he has also distributed many copies to many people. So if any of you is interested, for you, those who are in IIT, it's easy. Just across the road, come to the ashram and get it from the ashram's bookshop. I don't think you will get it in other bookstores because we don't have a good distribution network. But in the ashram bookshop, which is not difficult for those who are in IIT to come to, you'll get it. The bookshop is open every day from every day except Monday. It's closed on Mondays. The rest of the days these days it is open from 9 to 5. And those of you who prefer an ebook, it is available as an ebook on Amazon. And even if you don't want to buy the book, come to the ashram. This is a picture postcard view of the ashram. The reality is perhaps even prettier than this. There are then less pretty. And what the picture may not show you is that there's an immense peace inside. So just to be in that peaceful atmosphere, as I said, the stress can be contagious and so can peace be. So to get infected with that peace, instead of all the negative propaganda and the fears and anxieties that are being passed on from one to the other, just come and spend some time in the peaceful atmosphere of the ashram. And the gates are open again every day except Monday from 9 to 5. This is one of our centers in the hills in Nainital. This is one, there is another one also, one Nivas, which is called. Both these centers are also open to visitors. Normally we had summer camps. This summer, because of the coronavirus pandemic, there are no regular camps, but as individuals you can book and go, of course, following all the regulations and the norms. You might be checked on the way for vaccination certificate or for a COVID negative certificate. Over there, again, there might be some restrictions in terms of the masks and social distancing, etc. But as individuals, you can go to one of these picturesque places in the hills. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.